Good morning, everybody. I've met some of you, but some of you are new faces. My name is Meg Riggs. I'm the Public Affairs Officer here at the U.S. Embassy. It has been our pleasure to partner with the companies you see around us to put together this Leadership in Tech series. A little over a week ago, we did a virtual session with Ivana Hu, who's with us in the room right now. She's come all the way to Zimbabwe. She's in the back. We started this conversation around 5G, but leadership in tech is much bigger than that. And so we are looking to explore the coming weeks how to make the most of your 4G, how to think about really good decisions as we move into 5G. What does tech mean in health? What does tech mean in agro? There's a lot that could help Zimbabwe basically leapfrog into the next generation. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel, but we want to start having conversations and building linkages between all of you and your American counterparts who are also thinking through these same challenges and trying to make the best decisions for their businesses, for their banks, for their enterprises. And so today's event is a series of panels to explore different parts of tech. We're going to kick off this morning on fintech and the fourth industrial revolution. We will then move along to the roles of med tech in the fourth revolution, and then end with network supports. And so we're going to do this in a series of panels. We'll try to make up some time so no one can pontificate. This is not our PhD theses. But we hope that it is truly useful. I truly want you to take notes about how we make this better or what you want the next conversation to be. I've got colleagues like Suzani, Becca in the back. We will design this as we go based on the questions and answers we hear from all of you. And so this should be a discussion even in how we fall down that rabbit hole in this tech space, all right? So with that, I will hand it over to the panel. I think we've got a mic there. I'll let each person quickly introduce themselves.
Morning, everyone. So my name is Munyaradzi Mafi, and I'm the head of digital development with Stanbic Bank. Look forward to interacting with you all today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Itai Tsoro. I'm with the Zimswitch Technologies. I'm the Haiti Technology Services.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tabani Mtetwa. I work for Inbax as the head of banking.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eugene Shaduka. I'm the CTO for EcoCash Holdings.
All right, I think let's start with, I'm going to start with you, and let's talk about how fintech and this revolution looks like through your institution's eyes. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, you can use that. Okay.
Morning again, everyone. So I hope you can all hear me loud and clear. So I know you're all expecting Dr. Alfred to give the keynote as per the brochure, so you can consider me to be the upgrade. So I'm just going to give his keynote address, and then I'll join the panel, and then we can just have a conversation around fintech and its role in the fourth industrial revolution. So fintech, as many of you know, refers to the use of technology to provide financial services and products. And the fourth industrial revolution, on the other side, is characterized by the convergence of digital, physical, and biological technologies. It is a time of rapid technological advancement and innovation, and it is transforming the way that we live and work today. The intersection of fintech and the fourth industrial revolution is where we see some of the most exciting developments in technology and finance. Fintech companies are using technologies such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, and Internet of Things to create new financial products and services that are disrupting traditional financial institutions. As fintech matures, fintech services on the continent are at an inflection point, and Zimbabwe has a significant opportunity to capitalize on the momentum of recent years to unlock further potential in this sector. One of the key areas where fintech is having an impact is in financial inclusion. Fintech has the potential to provide access to financial services for people who have previously been excluded, such as those in rural areas or those without a traditional banking relationship. Mobile payments and digital wallets are transforming the way that people do transactions, allowing people to access financial services with just a smartphone. Trends such as increased smartphone ownership, declining internet costs, and a young, fast-growing, and rapidly urbanizing population are fueling the success of fintech. In addition to this, the COVID-19 pandemic, even as it caused significant hardship and disrupted lives, has accelerated trends towards digitalization and has created a fertile environment for fintechs to grow and to flourish. Another area where fintech is making a difference is in investment management. Robo-advisors are using algorithms and AI to provide investment advice and manage portfolios at a fraction of the cost of traditional financial advisors. Some forecasts project that robo-advisors will manage 2.8 trillion in assets by the end of this year. This is making investment advice more accessible and affordable for people who may not have previously had access to these services. Fintech is also disrupting the traditional banking industry. Blockchain technology is being used to create decentralized financial systems that bypass traditional intermediaries, while peer-to-peer lending platforms are allowing individuals to lend and borrow without a bank as an intermediary. This is reducing the cost and complexity of financial transactions and may ultimately lead to a more democratized financial system. It is important for financial institutions and the industry at large to be awake to these developments and to analyze their impact on how financial transactions will look like in the world of tomorrow. How will transactions shift from cash to digital channels? How will electronic payments evolve from the current landscape that we have today? While the trends being observed in fintech growth are encouraging, there are also challenges that such rapid technological advancement brings, and we need to address these challenges. One of the key challenges is ensuring that fintech innovations are safe and secure, and that they protect consumers' privacy and data. As more financial transactions are conducted via digital channels, it is important that consumers can trust that their data is being protected. We are still at a point where one major breach or one major incident can damage the public's confidence in the financial sector and erode away all the goodwill that has been cultivated by fintech over the last few years. Another challenge is ensuring that the benefits of fintech are distributed fairly and equitably. While fintech has a potential to increase financial inclusion and provide access to financial services for underserved population, there is a risk that it could exacerbate existing inequalities if certain groups are left behind. For example, how do we ensure that women are involved and actively participating in economic activities? And how do we build solutions that cater to both the formal and informal economy alike? In order to reach scale and profitability for fintechs in the fourth industrial revolution, there is need for key infrastructure to be in place, particularly things like mobile coverage for both GSM and data, expansive distribution networks across the country, as well as necessary payments infrastructure. The variability of these factors across different areas of the country needs to be taken into consideration and solutioned for by fintech players. Achieving scale is only just one side of this coin. Lower disposable income and low customer loyalty is a threat to fintech growth and its ability to build profitable businesses. Low disposable income in particular has affected fintech growth for industries like capital markets and retail insurance and the like. Looking at emerging technologies such as blockchain and artificial intelligence, there is need for significant investment in order for their benefits to be realized in full. We need thought leaders who are looking into the future and who are willing to pay the price for success. The African market, particularly in financial services, often operates differently from that of the Western world and first world economies. This means we cannot simply copy and paste what has worked in other regions. Instead, we need to invest in building tailor-made solutions that work best for Zimbabwe and for its people. This investment also needs to apply to human capital, where we need to answer the question, how do we attract and retain the necessary skills to build and operationalize these technologies? Another challenge we're likely to face is adoption. There is a need to ensure that products being rolled out are not too complex for the typical Zimbabwean customer in order for them to achieve scale. The success of fintech products might rest on our ability to simplify these technologies into form factors that are simple to understand, easy to use, and easy to scale for Zimbabwean customers. In conclusion, fintech is an important driver of innovation in the financial industry, and it is expected to continue to play a major role in the fourth industrial revolution. It has the potential to increase financial inclusion, reduce costs, and democratize the financial system. However, it is important that we address these challenges that it brings to ensure that fintech is used in a responsible and ethical manner. And in doing this, we are giving it the best chance to succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think I'd like to start our conversation on your first major point, which is kind of privacy, the safety and security of your clients. I think that impacts both big businesses who have their entire industries at stake, but it also goes to the rural user who doesn't understand how you also will protect them. So I'm curious how you all are approaching that piece of it.
Thank you. So I think for the end user, I think the best effort that we can do is awareness. As you have seen, most financial institutions have put more effort and budgets towards awareness of the end user. And for those users that have not maybe had access to that information, I think systems themselves should be able to safeguard such users by implementing things that maybe when one enters, for instance, one lost or loses his card, and someone tries to do a payment online. So in that regard, the system should be able to, using artificial intelligence, to say this transaction could be a fraudulent activity, and they can have three maybe types, maybe three passes that can be input into the system, and the system locks, and that card is reported as a fraud, a suspect fraud activity that wants to be done from that card. So apart from the awareness side, I think systems that are built by the fintechs have to be robust, have to implement security in depth. What do I mean by security in depth? We look at the administrative part, the processes that are then put into the systems. Then we look at a logical security. What is it that access levels that are put into the systems? Are they going to then maybe enforce list privileges, or need to know only access for those users that are allowed to get into that system? Then there should also be technological security that is also embedded in those systems, where we are saying that we need to then put defense, perimeter defense, like putting firewalls. And nowadays, there are next generation firewalls which are intelligent enough to notice that the type of traffic that is coming is not legitimate traffic, and that can be blocked at that level. So security in depth, defense in depth, then it doesn't need someone to be there 24/7. It's something that will be operational, even if when people are at home, to protect the end user. It's money to protect the end user, that they not be able to lose their valuable money from the systems. So I think it has to be a two-pronged approach from the user side with the awareness, and from the fintech side, we need to implement security systems or innovations that protect the data and the transactions that are done by the users. Thank you.
Do others want to comment?
Yeah, so my colleague has touched on security. So what I think is on top of that, we need maybe the regulator to come in and just monitor and see whether the institutions, the fintechs, are also observing the security policies that they have put in place. Because yeah, you might have those policies written down, but now implementing it periodically, sending awareness messages to your clients so that they know that these kind of breaches that are happening in the market. Also even sharing of information amongst players to know that these are the kind of breaches that are coming in. I think in terms of security, there are also issues to do with AML that we need to observe again. So as fintechs, we need to make sure that our systems are also compliant, and they're also checking whether they are looking into AML issues, monitoring the transactions that are happening on the system. So that will be my comment.
All right, thank you. My colleagues have spoken about the basics of security. I also want to move further into the issues of fraud management. So there's need to put automated fraud management systems, because I think in this market, most of the security issues in courts are really fraud issues, and these are addressed by consumer awareness. And it is also the responsibility of all fintech providers, fintech service providers, to make sure that they play in consumer awareness programs. Also to observe the cybersecurity month and roll out programs which conscientize the market in terms of what cybersecurity is about and the responsibility of the provider and the customer at large. What I also wanted to highlight is the issue to do with automated security management. So the service providers can set up what are called SOCs, which are security operations centers, which automate security management to make sure that threat intelligence are harvested or is harvested in an automated way. We spoke about artificial intelligence, where data is harvested and the data is the basis of the foundation for artificial intelligence for threat detection and avoidance. I think that's my contribution on this issue of security, information security.
So I think your points collectively raise a question of what is the tech that's behind this, right? And I think probably most people on the street assume a bank must have their own coders. They must be designing the software, but in fact there's a layering of systems, right? So I think for the room that's here, understanding how does a bank or an institution go about making sure that the softwares they get are compatible? How do you make sure that you're up to date on those spaces? How is that policy decision made internally to make sure that that security management center has the tech that it needs, has the staffing that it needs, that it's in a position to actually live up to what you would assume the regulatory role would then verify? But how are those decisions being made?
So I think there's several sides to it. So from a regulatory perspective, there are prescriptive measures that are given by regulators in terms of how the standards of cybersecurity in organizations, financial organizations is supposed to meet. And there's also the typical audit processes that are done and now have a very heavy focus in terms of what have we done from a cybersecurity perspective. Is it enough to safeguard our information? And I think generally I am encouraged by the level of focus that is now being put into cybersecurity in the financial services space, because most institutions have realized that this is a major area of vulnerability that needs to be safeguarded against, and the organization would have in its structures cybersecurity personnel who are responsible for installing these softwares. There are industry standards, best-in-class software that are recognized that these are the softwares that are recommended to make sure that our systems are secure. And there's also, like I mentioned, some level of prescriptive measures that are given by the regulator.
Thank you for that one. I think also maybe to paint a picture of Zimbabwe. So for the fintech industry, for the financial industry, there is a standardization. I think that's the big thing that we use so that, for instance, all the banks in Zimbabwe, when we come to card transactions, they use one standard. When it comes also to payments, EFTs, they also use a standard like ISO 20022 or ISO 8583. So what then happens is that for Zimbabwe's situation, there is a central player in the middle who is regulated by the Reserve Bank. That is a ZimSwitch, which foster interoperability amongst all the players. So you find that at ZimSwitch, and through the use of those standards, same standards that have been used by all players, they are then forced to implement certain security measures for their transaction set. And in addition, an additional role is then done by a SIM switch, where it has a central fraud management system, which is sitting at the hub. For instance, if I can give an example of a card fraud management, a transaction can be done in Harare, CBD. Then if the same card does a transaction, say in Bulawayo, in the next 1 hour or 30 minutes, that is automatically flagged as a fraudulent activity. So we find that apart from the security measures that are
as players in the market, we discuss these issues. So it will help us to actually identify the problems that we have, also to just share the information in these groupings. So that will be also some sort of self-regulation that we are doing as players, sharing information on issues to do with security, compliance with what the standards that are put in place, so that we as peers will actually then help each other as an industry.
All right, thank you. So the commitment should start at board level and at executive level to make sure that internally policies are approved, budgets are provided for to fund the initiatives in security. They can be quite expensive. Then from the third industrial revolution, we moved from closed loop systems, and now we are operating in open loop systems. So fintech is mainly thriving on integrations, system integrations. So we are now playing in the API economy. And as you engage partners, you have to perform due diligence on those partners to make sure that you check their audit reports, check their security assessment reports, and as well as their commitment to security. So you look at their certification towards standard like PCI DSS, which is the payment card industry data security standard, the ISO 27001 standard for information security management systems. So that's how you then make sure that all parties which play in the provision of financial services live up to their standard in terms of providing secure services to customers. Thank you.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor, so be thinking about what your question would be. In your remarks, you talked about usability, and I'm going to out my own user limitations. I was recently back in the United States and at my own headquarters, and I went to go buy lunch, and the entire cafeteria for 2,000 employees, no cash. And you had PAOs from all over the world, a lot of us coming out of Africa where we have not been tapping. And everyone behind us in the room was like watching all of us with our cash in our hands trying to buy our sandwich for lunch that day. Go quickly figure out how to use my watch because I didn't have a credit card that tapped, but my watch could tap. And so I ended up calling a friend who's in fintech in London and being like, tell me how this is safe again. And tell me how I use it. And so, she literally, God bless her, at night walked me through how to set up my phone so it set up to my watch so that I could buy my lunch that day. I think as this technology moves, and it's moving quickly, how do you make sure people, one, know how to use it, that it has ease of use, and that you're bringing, if we in this room show up in places where tap only, and we're all like, whoa, what does that even mean for someone coming up from Sheridze? Or how does that tech move? A bunch of Americans were talking recently about being home. They live here. They got to a health clinic because a kid was sick. And the health clinic was like, well, we will do this thing. It will send you a text, and then we can hook you up. And they're like, but I don't have a phone. I don't live here. And they're like, what do you mean you don't have a phone? And so you realize, right then in that second, it takes a tearful mom with a sick kid before someone goes, oh, we'll find an old way to do this. We'll take care of your child. But the tech moves on very quickly. even when you have resources at hand. So how do you make that usefulness and that accessibility as we move through this?
Thank you. I think it starts with how we do our product development. So like I was mentioning in the keynote, one of the things that we need to ensure is that the products that we are developing are very easy to use, simple for people to understand, and that is the way that I think we can achieve scale. Because what's typical about most of the emerging technologies is that they're very complicated. Usually half a room doesn't know what blockchain is or what an NFT is and things like that. So the fourth industrial revolution, I think it's characterized by that very rapid evolution of technology, looking at how quickly things are being taken up. I was looking at some statistics saying it took the phone 75 years to reach 100 million users. And then you find Instagram hit 100 million users in 2 years. Pokemon Go hit 100 million users in a month. And so things are coming at us very quickly. So I think the key is to make sure that when you're doing product development, especially for markets like ours, like Zimbabwe, the products need to be very, very simple for people to understand and to use, which I think is attributable to the success of mobile money in Zim. It was solving a problem, but it was also very accessible, very easy to use, and that's how it was able to scale as quickly as it did. And I think the other angle towards that is we need to invest in when we do our marketing and our promotions. I think a lot of that has to go into educating customers so that they understand how these new things work, because these things are coming at them very quick and fast, and they may not catch on as quick. So part of our marketing effort, it should be like, it's not just a billboard telling you that I have a new product, but on that same billboard I kind of need to tell you what it does and how to use it and where to find it and all of that. So a lot of the marketing effort has to go into like customer education so that people understand how that works.
Thank you. So I like to paint the Zimbabwean picture always. So for Zimbabwe, I think we are not yet there at wearables, but we are not far away from the rest of the world. So you find that we have products in the market. Maybe it's a matter of awareness. For instance, if you travel from Harare to Mutede, all the toll gates, you can use tap and go. So you can actually tap on toll gates with your cards. So what the regulators have done is they've put a limit on the amounts that can be tapped so that they curb fraud and such things. So you find that in Zimbabwe, we already have a QR code payments, which are done using a QR code. We also have other card not present payments, like my friend from Econet, they have merchant codes. And there is also a product on the market that can also utilize account numbers, which utilizes merchant codes as well, which is a card not present transaction, which is a cashless a transaction as well. So you find that we are not very far. But then what is important is for the industry to move at the same pace. So you find that you go to bank A, they don't have a tap card. You go to bank B, they have a tap card. So through IPAs, which he talked of, industry gatherings that are happening, they happen nearly every month. We are pushing for all players in the financial industry to embrace those technologies so that such transactions can take place. Also, from my friend from Econet, you can go to a supermarket and pay using your phone. There's a push message that is pushed to your phone. So there's another product as well that we have introduced, that is recently introduced, where you can do the same from your account numbers using your mobile phone. You go to your supermarket, you just put your account number and the message is done. which is a card not present transaction, and it's also a cashless transaction. So I think it's an issue of awareness and also moving together as an industry to make sure that such initiatives are taken up at the same time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So what I think also works is that maybe we need to make sure that from the grassroots where the kids are, we catch them young. We introduce them to these products and these services when they're young. So I think one of the strategies that can work is that we put these products in the games that they are playing. So when they grow up, they actually know that this is how you pay. This is how you use these innovative products that are coming out of fintech. There are also initiatives like the Global Man Week that happens, where financial institutions are going into schools, universities, educating the students there about how they can use these innovative products that are coming from banks. So I think it's another initiative that we can then, as an industry, adopt. We catch them young, we teach them, they know that these are the innovative products that we have that are coming.
I would say the idea is to focus on the service. We don't offer banking services, we don't offer recharge services. What we offer is a wallet. That's the basis of financial services. So if you stick to the basics, what you do is you build trust in the market. And when the market trusts you, they stop oscillating between cash and digital services. Because what the industry is battling right now is trust in the formal banking services, is trust in digital financial services, and that's what we just need to address. Then in terms of making sure that the services that we offer are usable, it's about employing user-centered design principles, where you use UI and UX designers to make sure that they give the best interface to customers so that the service is, number one, accessible, and number two, it's easy to use. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take the two questions and let the panel do this so that we're not getting in the way of your coffee. Who would like to ask the first question? Go ahead. If I can get there. I can.
All right, no, I think it's fine enough. Thank you. So basically to the panelists, maybe a comment against the issues to do with charges. Like we have noted particularly in our current construct as Zim, it's actually cheap for you to transact in cash because most of your transactions maybe you earn cash and you'd want to pay in cash. And there is this view that we have from the general populace that the moment you start to transact and you are using apps, it's actually expensive. Like for an example, there is the 2% IMTT, the bank is charging 3%. How do you envisage maybe that view in the near future such that it would give at least the public the confidence to transact using these platforms that we are talking about?
And the reality is there's a class piece on that, right? People with less money are going to be less likely to pay 2%, and others are going to be like, it's worth it for the service. Sure. Do you mind coming a little closer? Sorry.
I can be loud. It's fine. So my question to the panelists, it's a comment as well as a question, is with regards to the role of the regulator. You'd find any new financial innovation that should come up needs to go through the Reserve Bank sandbox. And there is very limited input to that sandbox from actual players in the field. I am talking from a space of a person who deals with people who are starting up when you are making projects that are around fintech and insurtech and different kind of techs that need to go through the sandbox. while you are established players, it's easier for you to push products into the market because you're already regulated, you know the requirements, and you've got the resources. However, in cases of startups, which is the case for most of the world, that new innovations don't really come from established players, but from startups which are then bought by established players after they've seen that there is value in this product. We've got many startups within Zimbabwe, particularly in the fintech space, who are not getting adequate support through investment and even the knowledge that you speak of. In terms of security, they might have a brilliant product, but because they do not understand aspects of security, ISO certification, they don't go anywhere despite them having a very good product that can actually change lives. Because what I've found is that all these institutions can come up with good products. They are not really people who are on the ground for them to be placed to create such innovations. Innovations usually come from a young person who has maybe struggled with a particular service and they come up with a solution. But now an idea is only an idea, and then they need you as the big guys to say, we're going to support you, or we're going to buy your product or service, or become an investor, or even a mentor, so that you can take this product to the next level. As our EcoCare started, it was a startup. It was a novel idea, which wasn't what was already in the market. So I would request, or rather plead with you guys to say, sit down with the regulator and say, what can we do for startups and for fintechs who want to enter the market and create products which can actually create a difference in the lives of the average African. And the last thing, I'm sorry I've spoken too much, is to say context when you're creating your products. 60% of the Zimbabwean population lives in rural areas. Network there is sometimes dodgy. So if you're going to say your service requires a watch or a phone, okay, sometimes how am I going to charge my phone daily? They don't charge their phones often because of electricity issues. Network is not very stable in those parts. And when you put out your marketing material, is it in a language that they understand? Is it relatable? So these are other issues that when we are coming up with these innovations, yes, we are in the 4th industrial revolution, but we need to do it in context of the environment in which that we operate. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I think I'll start with the second question first. I do agree largely with a lot of what of the points that you've raised. I think from how I see it, we do have a regulator who is supportive of fintech and startups and trying to enable them, especially from a licensing standpoint. Looking at how the landscape looked a couple of years ago, it was quite restrictive in terms of how what you needed to have in order to get a license and to operate. And I think it's somewhat simplified. But where I think the gap is, which is something you've also spoken to, is around support from the private sector, which I think is what is still lacking a bit. So yes, like you mentioned, these startups, they need a lot of that help in terms of accessing real world data, being able to interact with the banking systems that are already in place. And I think most players in the banking industry are still sort of setting up the infrastructure to be able to enable that to happen. Most banks have already woken up to this, and they've exposed to some level APIs that startups can integrate with to start to access these formal banking rails, and they are open to sit with them down and to see how best they can collaborate to partner with these startups and give them that springboard and that flywheel effect. But I think there is still a lot of work that we need to put in to get the private players to be more, or the incumbent industry players to be more receptive to startups and to help them on this journey, to partner with them and help them grow. The point around context when creating products, I think, is also a very valid point. Like you've mentioned, we have a very large rural population, and you do find that for most fintechs, they will try to have, maybe some element of accessibility into the product. People are creating products that work offline because they know we do have data issues. Most fintechs, if it's a financial services product, it will be accessible on USSD because data is a challenge. But USSD, I think there's almost 100% coverage of like 2G or basic GSM in most of the country. So it is very important. It does mean we are limited in how we can leverage some of these new emerging technologies because of those limitations. But once we catch up and we have infrastructure in place that bridges that gap, I think that will get us there. And then to the first question around the transaction charges, I think my thought process around that is that partly, it's a scale issue as well that does affect us as a country, because at a large enough scale, it is easy to make a product profitable with cheap charges. If I'm to go to launch a product in South Africa, the addressable market is much larger. If I'm addressing 5% of that market, I'm already, I have millions of customers already. But when you then come to Zimbabwe, we have a population of just about 16 million, maybe. If you then filter down to those who are economically active, and then of those that are economically active, they're being shared by 22 banks. I think the economics of it is what makes the charges to be rather steeper than in other countries, because from a scale perspective, we are quite disadvantaged. We're a small economy, and I think that's why we end up maybe with some of the charges that we do have. I don't know exactly how we solution for that, but I think the solution is that if a product does introduce the level of convenience that customers are looking for, they are willing to pay that premium to be able to access the service. I think looking at how mobile money has succeeded, I always go back to that as a good example. It really solved a major problem of financial inclusion. And even though it does charge almost the same charges, banks charge it, everything, but because it's solving a problem that people face, they will pay that premium to have their problem solved.
Thank you. So I think I'll start with the issue of charges. So I think for the financial system, there's the Reserve Bank, then there's a national switch, which is ZimSwitch. Then there are the financial players that are the banks and also mobile players. So I think you have seen recently there's that reduction of 15% by the regulator, by the government. And I think through continual engagement and at that fora, we'll be able to bring down the charges and make the transactions affordable by many. So I think I've taken note also from my organization, who has interactions with the regulator to also do those engagements. Then in terms of new products, like you said, the Reserve Bank has got a sandbox. I think as the national switch, we also have a sandbox environment for fintechs, for startups. I will leave my details for those players that would want to engage in any product testing, new initiatives, innovations. We are open to that as the national switch of Zimbabwe, the sole national switch of Zimbabwe. So you are welcome. And we also do have innovation hub clinics that we do run for such idea generation or harvesting, where such ideas can then be developed into products as such. So we are open and for such ideas. So people are free to come to the national switch, which is also part of the regulator, the Reserve Bank. So once your product is tested by us, and then you want to then present your products to the Reserve Bank, we will then chip in with the results and the reports, and then if it's a viable product, I don't think it will be a problem for you to get that product to market. Thank you.
Okay, I will start also with the issue of charges. At Inbucks, I think we operate a low cost to no cost kind of model, and the issue of IMT has also been a challenge. But like what my colleague has said, that there was a reduction. Actually, on the USD, it used to be 4%, but now it's 2%. So with enough lobbying, maybe even looking for tax incentives from the government for those who are maybe going towards financial inclusion, we hope that the government will actually then give us those incentives, and we pass it on to the clients, and the cost will be reduced there. Then in terms of the other question, my thoughts around that is that maybe with enough collaboration and partnership, nowadays there's the concept of open banking, where you come and plug into to our system, maybe at Inbucks, through APIs. So it's something that I'm sure we are also looking at to say if there are players with innovative solutions that they think will service the market that we are also service, and also going towards the vision that we have of low cost to no cost, then we will look to integrating with those players and also have to go through the regulator. Thank you.
All right, so the major challenge is on the cost of doing business. However, we are committed as fintech players and as EcoCash to bring down the cost of transacting for the general public. So we roll out innovative services which are aimed at bringing down the cost of transacting. And what we do is we don't always go it alone. We work through partnerships. If there is a partner who can do things better than us and make it cheaper for our customers, we integrate. And to our customers, the major essence of transacting digitally is not just about keeping it, I would say, cheap for now. It's about the other services, the enhanced services that you can get by transacting digitally. So you find out that what the services that we are offering are convenient, they are secure, and you have got ease of tracking your transactions, and you also have access to enhanced financial services. Take, for example, micro-lending. So as you transact, you also build upon your credit rating, and it also applies to individuals and SMEs such that you then get access to credit, which can help you grow and develop your business. Thank you.
Maybe before I give you back, for those that are producing those innovations, think of interoperability. The government is preaching interoperability. It doesn't have to be a closed loop kind of innovation. So your innovations have to be inclusive of everyone. In financial inclusion, think of the people that are in the grassroots, in the rural areas, and all the financial players. Thank you.
To wrap up this conversation, I'm struck by a phrase that I say to my kids all the time. Fairness and equal are not the same thing. I don't know how many of you have like a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, and the 10-year-old says, it's not fair, she gets to do that. She's 13. And so in a market economy where you need things it's got to be bankable, it has to be financially sustainable, that does mean everyone doesn't get it. But that at the same time, making sure that you keep inclusive economies always in the back of your mind as you try to build things that do bring more people into that space. But it can be fair, but that doesn't mean everyone has the same equal access. And so this is a tough conversation. I think people want to bring everyone up at the same time all at once. And the world doesn't work that way. And so never letting go of the inclusive economy goal, but at the same understanding that there are inequalities that happen along this way. All right, with that, we are over time. I apologize. We're going to do a coffee break, and I'd like everybody to be back in their seats at 11:15. It's basically 11 right now, 10:57 for those who are exact. So that gives you a chance. There's bathrooms, there's coffee, and then we'll be back here for the next conversation in 15 minutes. Thank you, everybody.
For the next session. Thank you very much. So my name is Shingai Chipamaunga, and most people call me by my first name because I always say my last name is my father's name. And some bastardize it and call me Dr. Chips as well. So feel free to call me whatever you choose to call me. Welcome to the second session that's really going to be looking at something that is of passion to us as healthcare workers, which is the role of medical technology in the fourth industrial revolution. So I think most of us here, we're here because we have an interest in tech. And I think we are biased in that we believe that technology is just really reshaping the world around us. And I think it cannot be, the example of that cannot be more than in medicine. And so I'm really looking forward to this session. I think we've got a good, some panelists that are here. We've got a keynote speaker from a key leader in medicine in Zimbabwe. And I'm really, really looking forward to it. And I hope it can be interactive and can all get to ask questions. So without wasting more time, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. That's Mr. Ndlovu, Vulindlela Ndlovu. He is the current CEO for CIMAS. Most of us who are in the medical sector will know him. He's been at the realm of for about over 10 years, right? And he's really just, at the time that he's been at CIMAS, he's really shaped or reshaped the way medicine is practiced in Zimbabwe. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he thinks about the present and about the future, and getting some insights from him this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Doc, for the introduction. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk today at this forum. I hope this works. I don't have one of those pastor voices, so I need this. So I think it's a good opportunity to exchange views. By the way, I've only been at the helm of CIMAS for, I think, almost 7 years now. 10 is a little too much to be at the helm of any organization. I think you do run out of steam after a while. So I think this is my 7th year. So when I look at healthcare, I think I really consider myself lucky to be in healthcare at this time. Because, you know, when you look at the fourth industrial revolution and how it touches on health, for me, in terms of interest, I think that's where one of the most profound impacts is going to be, or it's happening. And for me, it's two fields. It's healthcare and agriculture, you know. Maybe because my other job is agriculture. But I just found those things that are happening there extremely fascinating. I don't think I need to define for you what the fourth industrial revolution is. But like I say, I consider myself lucky to be living at this time. You know, the things that we've experienced in the last years, yes, I've been around the block for a lot of years. So when I went to school, people were talking about the future is going to be in optical fiber. Nobody actually said there's the internet coming, you know. When I went to varsity, we didn't have laptops. We were using a mainframe. Data general mainframe, and started working still those mainframes. We went on to use the largely IBM Wang or one of those. Then I started working. I had my first interaction with the Apple Macintosh, and this was in the late 80s. And at that time, nobody knew where Apple was going. I don't know if any of you have seen the Apple Macintosh. You know, you should Google it. Exciting little instrument. But it was so exciting because of what we could do. I was in auditing then. We started doing our flowcharts there, and then it died down a little bit when people were shifting over to the DOS-based machines, or the laptops as we know them now. Guess what? A few years later, Apple came with a big bang. So that's why I say for me, it's been very impactful. And 10 or 15 years ago, there was a book written called Abundance.
It was written by someone called Peter Diamandis, and it was talking about the future. And the important thing about that book was how he spoke about how things will happen exponentially. So I've described a long time of things that I saw, in the last 4 or 5 decades. But what has happened in the last few years for me has been really exciting and impactful, to a point where I say I'm lucky to be working at this time, to be still working at this time and experiencing this. So when we talk about healthcare 4.0, or the fourth industrial revolution as it pertains to health, it's about that fusion of technologies, and it's blurring the lines between physical, digital, and biological. And that's where, for me, it really gets impactful. I'll share later on with you on how we see that as our organization. And this transformation has brought huge opportunities in healthcare. And we're looking at improving the diagnosis. I'm sure the panel here will talk to that. Streamlining operations and enhancing patient care. And that is your healthcare 4.0. And we find that while these technologies still rely on these capabilities still rely on the technologies of the third industrial revolution, which is where we had your biotechnology and things like that. The fourth industrial revolution is exciting in that this is where technology becomes embedded within our societies, and especially even our human body, When it touches on human body, people listen. When I joined Siemens about 10 years ago, one of the thought processes that was coming about was how people are living longer, and how technology is actually going to make it possible for people to live longer, And the predictions are there, and you can see it even now because of the medicines that are available. People are indeed living longer. But I think these guys that are 10 years old now, they are in for a road shock in terms of how long they would live because of the technologies that were there, When you talk about genomics, where people are studying the actual gene formation and coming up with treatments that are good for your own gene formation, the impact is huge. A lot of studies on dementia right now in terms of how to intervene early to make sure that, because it's inevitable that people will live longer, but it's the quality of the life that you enjoy. So 100 is going to be the new normal. So that for me is also quite exciting. Not because it is exciting in the sense that people are already living long now, but the quality of the lives they live at that point is not a quality that you appreciate, My mom turned 96 last year, and but she's been fine all along. But you can tell it's increasingly difficult, But technology will make it increasingly easy. So we see a very interesting environment and a lot of disruptive technologies, and the trends that we've been talking about are now impactful. Your Internet of Things, your robotics, your VR, virtual reality, and of course AI. And this is changing how we live and work, Don't move the slides yet. We're not there. I'm still at the introduction. We're still there. So I think I've talked about medtech and what it means, and it's about how we're going to diagnose, how we're going to monitor and treat various medical conditions. But the interesting shift that we're seeing is that 10 years ago, for example, at Siemens, we started a wellness program called ICO. After my doctor, they diagnosed me of all sorts of things. And at that point, I used to attend international conferences, and nobody wanted to hear about wellness. But now I go there, particularly post-COVID, everyone is talking about wellness, everyone is talking about mental health, and guess what? This is where technology comes in. We're all familiar with wearables, so the impact is huge, in terms of that. So we talk about these devices that we wear, and that are used by healthcare professionals and us as well. We saw it during COVID where we used to have our own oximeters. We started checking all sorts of things for ourselves, our temperatures, our blood pressure, and even conveying them using telephonic means or whatever means, WhatsApp, to our doctors to monitor us every day, you know. But the potential we see in monitoring and promoting well-being and better health is huge. So for us, the integration of technology into the medical field is really shaping the field of medicine. And even in value terms, the medtech industry is growing, expected to reach something like 561 billion by 2025. And I'll talk about how this impact on us and how quite often we look and we follow. And I think if at the end of this, I'm talking about us starting to control the narrative as well, where these things are going, then we would have done something this morning. There are other things that medical technologies do, like simplifying admin functions, lowering our costs as payers, increasing access to care, and improving the overall delivery of healthcare. So I think we can go to the next slide now. The first slide. So why do I want to talk about SIMAs? Because maybe that's what I understand. If you have been in a place for more than 10 years, that's the only thing you can talk about. So our purpose is actually inspired by the SDG 3.8 in particular, where we're talking about well-being and access for health for everybody. We understand that health is a responsibility of all of us. And we saw it during COVID that you may have the money to look after yourself, but when it comes to communicable diseases, all of us have got to be well, you know? And one thing I learned as well is we run a hospital now, and you get people saying, I want a private ward. You know, when you are really sick, it doesn't matter what the ward is, as long as it's a bed. If you hear a guy saying, I want a private ward, he's not sick, you know? When you're really sick, you just want a bed, you know, and someone to attend to you. So we're talking about inspiring healthier communities by providing global standard health and wellness solutions. And for us, it's about intervening throughout the healthcare continuum, you know, from the time someone is born, from up to the time he's 100, but we're also talking about it from the time when he's well, to make sure we keep him well, which is why prevention and wellness is huge for us. When he needs treatment, he must have access to the treatment, but he must also get good quality treatment. So the pillar of what we do is value-based healthcare, which is we want to make sure that the outcomes are maximized, the better outcomes, and that's the numerator. The denominator, we can go to the next slide. The denominator is the cost. At what cost do you achieve that health? So we want to maximize the value to the patient, you know, the best health outcomes. And this is where there's convergence with all of us in the healthcare sector, that how do we maximize value to the patient? And guess what? For us, we see medtech as a catalyst for value-based care. And that definition of value-based care, which is talking about measuring health outcomes against the cost of delivering those health outcomes, is for me the best. You meet people talking about healthcare, value-based healthcare in various forums, but this is the essence of it. And I derived that definition from Michael Porter at Harvard, who has been pioneering this work on value-based healthcare. There's various facets to it, including how you organize healthcare around conditions, how you organize healthcare around various experts looking at people. Guess what? If you are going to share all these things about someone's healthcare, they need the data, you know? And the core to technology, the core to what we're having access to is the medical health record, you know? It may look like something that's there already, you know? A medical health record that can be shared by the various practitioners, you know? And I'll talk about how we struggle with that, what seems a simple concept. I'm encouraged now that when I go around to my doctors, they even are throwing away files. They are all now at least putting them digital files, and this is happening now. You know, for years we still had tons and tons of files. Guess what? The regulations still want us to keep those files and keep them forever. We're told you have to take them to the National Archives. You go to archives, they say we have no space for this, but keep it. So that is a problem. So I've spoken about value because I think we really need to understand value, which is maximizing of health outcomes. Why do I emphasize this? Because medtech is actually what is going to deliver this value-based healthcare in terms of, will it help us maximize health outcomes? You know, will it help us improve health outcomes? You know, when you say health outcomes, it means what matters to a person. If you have a knee replacement, how soon are you able to be functional to go back to work? You know, are you going to be lying around at home for the next 3 months? Or you, in a few days, be functional? Guess what? With some of the interventions that people are doing now, there's a lot of procedures that are done where people become functional at a third of the time they used to do so 10, 20 years ago. You know, with all these non-invasive procedures that these doctors do, you become functional very quickly. And this is where we are going. But it's also the diagnosis. We'll talk about the diagnosis as well. It's got to be right. You know, how often do you go from, in the past, how often did you go from pillar to post and no one can tell you exactly what's wrong with you? Guess what? MedTech is now making it possible for us to, I think, get better results and at a cost that we can afford. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Oh, you had already gone. Okay, so in curative services, we talk about the improved diagnostics. I've given an example there about in radiology, where lung cancer screening now uses what is called low-dose chest CT. It's much cheaper, much cheaper, and you can do it annually. So it's about prevention, and doctor will tell you with cancers, you need to find it early, you know? And lung cancers are a big killer, you know? Maybe I'm told even they kill far more people than your prostate and breast cancers in both sexes, you know, by factors, you know? Therefore, if you can diagnose this early, you've got vulnerable people. Now, we can have these tests annually, you know? For example, for smokers or people who were former smokers. We don't want smokers, we want former smokers, you know? We can now diagnose it early, you see? Then people get the treatment, you know? Then you've got people now using artificial intelligence, like in Tanzania, to look at the data trends in a particular area and see that now there's an outbreak there, you know? And this is happening right here in Africa. I spoke earlier on about electronic health records and the advantage of electronic health records. Your doctor can attend to you anyway. If your doctor is not away, or when he's going to a specialist, they don't need to write long letters to the specialist, you know. They just enter it there in the notes, and all of them can see what is happening with the patient. Even when the patient is referred back to the initial referring doctor, they also see what has happened with the patient, how the patient has progressed, what kind of care that they need. So electronic health records for us are, I think, one of the pluses that we'll have. The advantage that we see now, whereas previously, to achieve that, it meant that everybody needs to get the software for it, they need to get the machines for it, and learn how to use them. But now, with software as a service, it means we can access these services on the cloud, you know. And in our group, we already got most of our applications on the cloud. And we're working with our partners in the service care sector to make sure that we can all go onto platforms that are similar and thereby start having access to these electronic health records. But the good thing with these records as well is that they can be owned by the patient. The patient actually has got more control of them, you know. So it means even when something happens to me, wherever I am, I can find access to my records if I've traveled to South Africa or wherever in no time at all. But it also motivates me to look after my health if I understand what's happening to my health. Surgical robotics, robotic surgery. So far, we're used to that. Oh, this is happening in India, in South Africa, in the US. I think the time is coming for that to happen now. But the good thing for me as well is through the cloud, you could have a team of surgeons operating on someone here with another expert sitting at my clinic in Rochester, communicating with them, or even in China or wherever else in the world, you know. Great potential to upskill our professionals in Zimbabwe. And from where we come from, we really believe that we've got the expertise in Zimbabwe. We really believe that we need to work. I know I'm talking against Chair. We need to work to minimize patients we send out of Zimbabwe. And we saw it during COVID, when all of a sudden you couldn't go anywhere, you know, you had to be treated here, you know. So I think we really need to be serious about that. And for me, those are some of the tools that will assist us. So we're looking forward to, in the not too distant future, to using some of these technologies here. Then we talk about nuclear medicines and artificial intelligence-based curative services, where with the use of artificial intelligence, there's now potential for particular diseases, especially the cancers, to help in coming up with, towards precision medicine, where they investigate your particular gene formation, and the medicine is sought particularly for you. Or in some instances, it's about looking for the medicines that will work at the time, that are affordable, that are maybe even cheaper than the branded drugs. And even the drug companies are now exploring artificial intelligence assisted drug development, thereby lowering the cycle. The advantage with artificial intelligence is the ability to process huge amounts of data. You know, that's a huge advantage. And artificial intelligence, by the way, is not there to replace the doctors, because it still needs to be given guidance in terms of what is it actually interpreting, you know. But also remember, the big part of what doctors play is actually talking to you and getting your mind psyched up for the treatments that you will receive, you know. So never underestimate the mental, psychological part of actually seeing you through that difficult phase, you know, delivering that bad news. You can't say a computer at Google is going to deliver that, you know. I don't think Google can replace a medical degree, you know. So I think we see big opportunities there. And by the way, this nuclear medicine is here. I was at a conference in South Africa earlier in the week, where they've already registered these medicines for certain treatments, and the costs are not that horrendous. They are expensive, but they are affordable, you know. And especially when you get to the cancers, when you get to the cancers where now it's at an advanced cancer stage, and you need specialist treatment, which maybe the available chemotherapy drugs can't do, where it's targeting the particular cancer cells. Those medicines are available now. And we hope that even in this country we'll have access to those medicines. We can go to the next slide. Disease prevention and wellness through medtech. I spoke about wellness earlier on, and disease prevention. When you talk about, maybe if you want to talk about virtual reality, it has found several applications in healthcare, and it's helping us in terms of how medical professionals deliver care. One of the things that happens, it provides some pretty immersive training environments for medical professionals and the wellness coaches. And earlier on, I spoke very briefly about the quality of experts we've got in the country. And now that we've got quality to the technology, it means we can continue to upgrade those experts. Those platforms are there. And that's what the fourth industrial revolution is doing for us. And some of the things are already happening, you know. So medical students can learn in a better way, learning anatomy and all these things. And if ever there's an investment we can make in our country, You know, I know a lot of us like to invest in sending our children to the US and all these wonderful places. But as businesses, one responsibility I think we have, we need to invest in our academic institutions in the country, particularly in science and technology. I'm really encouraged by what government is doing in terms of the curriculum that they are now pushing forward. But it's one thing for us as corporate citizens to sit and say, governments, they always fail. We need to put our money where our mouths is, you know, and stop this business of looking after me. You know, you can afford to send your kid to the US or wherever you're sending them to, but not everybody can. And yet maybe there's a kid with more potential who is actually sitting in some rural area somewhere, whose only access to education is the UZ. So for me, I really think whenever I talk to business leaders, we need to be serious about putting money in our institutions. One of the ones that earlier on I spoke about genomics and precision medicines. And okay, there's controversies in all these things, but now you know that they are even having artificial wombs, you know, where they put the embryos there, and it's called, it's a company called Ectolife, you know, where used responsible, these things have got ethical considerations. I know we all panicked, those of us who were around during Dolly the sheep cloning, and we said, this is coming to humans, it is here now. But use it responsible. And maybe there's some traits you need to eliminate from some gene formation of a person, you know? And this is what this is doing. So one of the things we say, we must be the early adopters of technology, you know? At the end of it, I'll talk about this early adoption of technology. So at CIMAS, we are currently setting up a gene sequencing machine because we think it will help us in diagnosis in terms of the cancers and so on and so forth. She tells me I have 5 minutes, I hardly started. No, I'm kidding. I've spoken about disease monitoring. I think I will not waste more time on that. And artificial intelligence, assisting with clinical decision support and providing real-time evidence-based recommendations. You know, one of the things that I saw demonstrated is because mental well-being is so important and we're not reaching enough people. I don't know how many psychiatrists or psychologists are in Zimbabwe, but with the use of online platforms, you know, they now can get avatars trained to actually counsel in mental health, okay? And there's a lot of platforms that have been set up, particularly in the US, for mental health counseling. We can sit and fold our arms, or we can buy these things. They come to us, then they sell to us at $5 per person per month, okay? But we can develop our own. But I always wonder, and then I say, if you're in Zim, and someone comes from me to you and says, Ndirugona Mepo, is that American avatar going to ask him? You know? If someone comes and says, you know, there's things I'm seeing, what do you call them? Yeah, you know, with African origin. So this is the danger of us sitting on the side and not being proactive in these kind of things. If you can move to the last slide, next slide. No, the one, the CIMAS journey. Okay, I'm not going to talk much about it, but it's how we actually found out during COVID that we accelerated in terms of our adoption of technology. We developed a vax application which could track who has been vaccinated in our membership. It could track how much vaccines we've used and so on and so forth. It could be used as a vaccination passport. Guess what? We actually offered it to our government. And yeah. And the idea was that if our government had accepted it, we were going to offer it to other governments. We developed it at very quick speed. But unfortunately, our government at the time felt that they were not comfortable with cloud-based solutions. And these are some of the things we need to talk about. Okay. I won't talk more about what we're doing there, but if I can move to the next slide. So, some of the things we have seen, and it also came through this COVID response, were these mobile devices. for nurses and clients, I spoke earlier on about that. The home hospital, monitoring someone from home, this is huge, you know? And we need to prepare for this, particularly in Zimbabwe. That's how we can actually reach access. You know, one thing about health, I talk about sustainable development goals. It's about reaching everybody. It's about equity in health, you know? It's one thing for me to be able to go to Avenues Clinic when 80% of the country cannot go there, you know? What good is that? What resources are we creating for the country if we can't all be well? So we need to create these avenues. Home hospital is here. Home hospital is something that we should have taken from COVID. At Siemens, at some point, we imported 100 oxygen concentrators. And at one of the worst COVID episodes, I think it was January 2021, if I'm correct, all of them were out at the homes, you know? Now I know with home-based care, you can look after stroke patients. You can look after dementia patients very well and monitor them from home. You know, you in the clinic can get the statistics at home. If we can go to the next slide, I'm getting there, Doc. We're getting the exciting part. So I think I've spoken to most of these things, but the challenges are obviously regulation. You know, we need to get our regulation to move with the times, like this thing, keep the physical forms. It sounds more like the US Embassy. Bring the physical things, keep your gadgets outside. Something like that. You know? Regulation. Also limited local models. I spoke about that avatar that has been trained for mental coaching, you know? Does that avatar, will it understand when he says, you know? So we need to create that. And we've got the same problem when the medicines are being developed. A lot of them are being tested in the West. They are being tested among Caucasian people. And are they fit for us? Which is, we don't get 100% fit, but let's have a better fit. Limited tech infrastructure. We can talk all day about it. And the other day I saw, in this link to health, I saw a picture of some technicians from a mobile company, from one of our technology companies, dressed as nurses somewhere in the UK. That's what we're up against. Ethical issues. We have to be very conscious of the ethical issues. Sometimes some of the people rush quickly to the market. You know about that case I think it was in the US or so, where someone rushed to the market and said, I found a diagnostics, which was a pathology test, where from a single drop, you know, I can give you all these things at a fraction of the cost. It turned out to be a hoax, but they were onto something. They just became greedy and went to the market too early. I think they were onto something. Right, last slide. I promise it's the last one. No, the one before that one. So these are the impediments. So one thing we've found in our journey, trying to do this in Africa, you come across a lot of obstacles. And I'm not mourning, because we cannot mourn about what other people are doing in their countries. We must take control of the narrative, you know, and stop being third-time adopters of technology. If ever there's anything, in my view, of all the revolutions that have taken place, that will be an equalizer, it is the fourth industrial revolution, you know, because it just needs you and your brain, you know. But now you find the youngsters are busy with their brains, and they are learning all this coding, what is called gig. They're learning all this coding so that they work for, you know, companies from the West. None of them thinks I can do this and monetize it. You know, why did Bill Gates think about monetizing this while I was still wondering about, what's optical fiber going to do? Bill Gates understood that optical fiber is about the internet. You see? Those guys understood that, you know? And they said, what gadgets can I put in everybody's hand? So I'm not mourning, but these things are impediment. We come across products we're trying to access. We're always the last to access it. We saw it during the vaccines as well. There was a point where we're not even on the list for the distribution of the vaccines. And it means we must take control of the narrative. There's a product that very keen on Microsoft Cloud for IK. What's the answer? Not yet available for Zimbabwe. You know, another company in mental wellness, mental health counseling. we're only doing it for Europe. If it's Africa, maybe South Africa, you know? Then other initiatives that Microsoft is doing, yes, in other parts of Africa, but we're always excluded, you know? And for me, that needs to change if we're to progress. Software licensing, it's expensive for our market, you know? And I think something needs to happen. I've spoken about the tech skills, where we're busy moving our skills to countries that have got excess skills, and simply because we've got that mentality that we must work for those instead of monetizing what we have. I thank you. Was that still about health?
Thank you very much, mostly for reminding me how our former First Lady felt when she reminded the then President that he had been talking for a bit too long. Okay, so for us to continue with the conversation at hand, I'm going to ask the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and I think from there then we'll take it to a conversation. If I could start off with you, Dr. Nyakabao.
Morning. I am Marlon Ralph Nyakabao. I'm a medical doctor, but in 2016, sharing the enthusiasm and excitement that Voli got after seeing all the exciting potential that technology has in terms of solving health-related problems, I pursued or diverted a full-time career in digital health, or e-health as it was known back then. So I left clinical practice to join the Econet Group, where I was heading their startups that were invested in digital health. Then in 2020, I left to go back into consultancy, where I'm working with NGOs, startups, and corporates that are invested in tapping into this potential that digital health has, or what the fourth industrial revolution is presenting us. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Sarana Smith. I'm a specialist physician, and I'm very interested in the implications of where we're going in terms of technology and health. But nothing as accomplished as you've done. The interest is there.
Thank you. My name is Cheo Charai. I'm an entrepreneur in the healthcare space. I firmly believe that access to healthcare should not be a luxury. It's a right, and everyone is entitled to access. So my businesses do this through medical supplies and medical tourism.
My name is Dr. Mochero Kambunutu. I'm a dermatologist, and I come to the digital healthcare space from my own personal interest. And I'm in private practice, and I do try to engage technology, having practiced in the US and now in Zimbabwe. I see the gaps or chasms that we have to bridge, but I think Zimbabweans very resilient, and I think it's a space where we can be leaders if we really give it a go.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself. So I'm going to start off with a question really directed towards you, Marlon, if that's okay, if I can call you Marlon. Good. Where do you, I really want to talk about the present and the future, where we are now and where we are seeing ourselves 5 to 10 years from now. Where do you see, what wakes you up, what excites you about where you see the intersection between the fourth industrial revolution, if you would, and healthcare? Talking about AI, pharmaceuticals, virtual reality, and so on. What sort of excites you? Where do you see us going in that space, in particular in our own clinical context?
All right, thanks. I'm very excited, I should say. Partly is the ability that this technology affords us in terms of improving access to care, ensuring that everyone across the country has ready access to even specialist services, as Dr. Mnutu here. So that is leveraging technology to solve a big problem. We've really talked about the SDGs that the United Nations and everyone else has. And it's a big goal, but for us to achieve that, make sure that we don't fail like what we did with the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. We have to leverage on these tools that are now available. So definitely technology can improve access, can improve the quality of care, and then also even save costs so that we then get to divert some of that money towards improving doctor salaries. Can I get an amen from those that are in the field? Yeah. But apart from those clear applications such as telemedicine, electronic health records, big data, and artificial intelligence, one of the things that really excites me is what this technology or fourth industrial revolution is going to do towards the changing the dynamics between doctors and patients, or shifting the dynamics between supply and demand in health economics. Because currently now we have the supplier, who are the doctors, kind of controlling most of the transactions. Or let me put it as paternalism or maternalism, where patients then just show up and then doctors are dictating. So if I give you a list of 5 medications, you go and take it. If I tell you to measure your blood pressure, you go and do as I. So that relationship is going to change, and we're going to see patients taking a more active role. So it won't be just a top-down, but it'll actually be a collaborative kind of interaction, because patients will be contributing more towards that clinical process by providing their data, such that we then get to be having, like I said, more collaborative interaction or engagement. So that's one of the things that really excites me, to kind of see that democratization of healthcare happening through technology. Thanks.
Okay. And I mean, to the clinicians, obviously, that are on the panel, that will be Cheru and Sarana. What sort of digital healthcare sort of tech do you guys use? I mean, pre and post-COVID. I know that most of our practice has really changed in the post-COVID era. And I know that I was reading an interesting article the other day that said at the time that a medical student graduates, they cease to be relevant anymore, because whatever they've learned, medicine has moved on from there. But in your clinical practice, whether it's with medical patients, whether it's with DEM, is there, what sort of tech do you foresee us using? Are we actually using right now? And how do you think that is actually impacting and improving patient care?
So I can start. So I think dermatology has been a field that has led with technology for a long time. And I think primarily it's because we're a visual field. So, from a very long time, even when I was a student, once people knew that I was a derm resident, they would send me pictures. What is this? Let me diagnose this over the phone. So I think in that space, I think we've seen a lot of growth, especially with AI, because there's now apps where people can take a picture of their mole, and the mole will run an algorithm and tell them whether this is something that needs to be seen by a doctor and be biopsied, or if it's okay. So there are limitations to that, because I think some of the, obviously with AI, it's the information that you put into it is what's going to make good output. So some of that does need to be expanded, because I think, in dermatology, one of the biggest concerns is how are we addressing skin of color? People with melanated skin, we don't show up in the classical textbooks. This is improving, I will say. And I think, there's been a big push to make sure that people with darker skin tones are appreciated. Oftentimes people will be like, oh, there's redness, and they can't see redness. So AI has made that, better. So I would say, that's one aspect. The other aspect, personally for myself, is that during pre-COVID, we did talk about, launching a telederm service, because, patients in Bulawayo come all the way to Harare, complain that I'm far away. Patients in Mutede complain I'm far away. So I had considered it. But then with COVID shutdowns, that became very urgent. And we did launch, we use a software program that is, it's not local, but it's an international software program where we can have patients make payments and then are hooked up into the system to be able to see me as a consultation. So even though I would have thought it would be wildly popular, I think, it does take a learning curve even for patients, because patients are used to seeing their doctor in person. And even with issues with pixelation and things like that, sometimes real-time virtual consult can be a challenge, because I can't quite see what the lesions look like. But dermatology also has what we call store and forward, where someone would take a picture, send it, and then we can sort of consult on that basis.
And I think for us as physicians and other practitioners, COVID really did change things, because where you'd previously only have a consultation where the doctor's there, the patient's there, there was a lot of restriction of movement, so patients couldn't get to you. It was difficult for them to get to you, even though it was an exemption. So we had to really move into the space of video-based or virtual-based consultations, which work really well in certain conditions, especially the chronic conditions where you're following up, you can have a discussion, the patient doesn't have to be sitting in a waiting room with other sick people getting sick. Because there was also that fear to say, if I come to the doctor, that's where all the people with COVID are. So the one place I'm definitely going to get COVID, not the supermarket, not the restaurant, but in the doctor's office. So being able to offer that service for patients who are at high risk of COVID complications helped. As Vuli's mentioned, we've moved to electronic health records, which is a stepping stone, but you still need to keep the paper-based records. So it is a bit of a challenge in terms of the regulation and the ethics around it.
So, I mean, you're mentioning moles and cancer and people sending, pictures on their apps and so forth. I mean, we cannot deny the fact that we live in a largely resource-constrained environment. And in as much as we do have patients who succumb to non-communicable diseases, a lot of the challenges that we have in Africa may be somewhat different for the challenges that these apps were developed for. How do you, from a patient-centered approach, and even as clinicians as well, how do we see these technologies that we're all excited about? I think outside we were talking about using holograms to simulate surgeries and, doing robotic surgery and so forth. But we practice in an environment where you need to just make a simple diagnosis of malaria. You have a large number of people who are dying from malaria. You have people that are still getting tested for HIV late. You have people who don't know that they're hypertensive and for a long time then ultimately present with a stroke. How do we take these technologies, whether it's wearable, whether it's AI, whether it's whatever it is that we're talking about, these apps, and bridge that gap in an environment where the population may not be necessarily as tech savvy or necessarily have the same access to what we may have access to in the private sector? How do we answer that question? How do we meet that unmet need with technology?
Okay, so I've got, I think I'm more patient than not on this panel, right? There's a lot to having the 4IR adapting. And I think it cuts across healthcare and fintech, the adaptiveness of the fourth generation. And there's a lot of social capital which is required. From a patient point of view, like doctor said, I'm used to seeing a doctor who then tells me what it is. I actually have difficulties describing exactly what is a burning pain, stinging. Just describing the kind of pain or what I'm going through is tough enough. So for me to then believe that this gadget here is going to translate what I'm feeling to the doctor when I myself am having difficulties, that's going to be difficult. There's also an issue of the inclination to cooperate. It really depends on the mindset and the background of a patient. If I'm not inclined to cooperate, even if the doctor has said, send me a photo of this angle, I'm not going to really do it, or I might do it at a different place, or just differently to what's expected. And I think the other problem we have is just a shortage of skill in the country. So we've got a shortage of doctors and of specialists. I think Tsungi are one of the two who've got your particular qualification. And yet the industry is developing so much. When someone qualifies, when you left uni, something else was being, produced, and there's more technology to it. So really, how are we going to adopt when the human capital, which is supposed to be the ones using it, are too few to even take time out and go and learn. And then when the technology itself is so fast-paced that there's just going to be so much time needed to have the doctors themselves learn of the technology. As soon as they've finished robotic surgery, he mentioned. And part of what we do is we allow people access to go to those hospitals where there's that technology. But there's been such a competition now. There's a competition in the manufacturer's realm to produce the most advanced equipment that sometimes you don't, I think, explore the advantage of what's there fully because you're racing to find the other innovation. So I think there's a danger in that competition. And unfortunately, the ethical issue with in medicine, I think is very big. Exactly who governs to what extent you need to reproduce an organ? Who is the one who is supposed to say, maybe just the fingers, and okay, let's put the heart, okay, maybe the arm and this. That moral aspect also impedes the adapting of all this technology. And I'm one of those who are genuinely scared, you know, by what's going on in the labs. What are people doing with this technology? And I'm sitting here from a more informed perspective. How about that person who doesn't have the background that I have? How quickly are they going to adopt the technology and have things inside them which might be releasing medicines at a particular point? Every 3 minutes you release a medicine. So there's a lot to do with social capital and getting us there, but there's also a factor of regulation. How far should we go in the healthcare space?
Thanks. No, pertinent questions. You know, it's about competing priorities. So when we talk about these things, some people might say it's too far-fetched. You know, we do have realities on the ground. There are people that live in areas where they don't even have network to start off with. But really, I think, well, it's a good thing we're talking about strategy. There's a building block to digital health, or building blocks to digital health that the WHO and the ITU put forward that is applied to advise national governments as they develop their strategies. I think even the current strategy that Zimbabwe has, the National Digital Strategy 2021-2025, kind of use those building blocks. And they look at those things to say infrastructure. Let's first have network, let's first have electricity. Then it also then talks about policy and regulation, that those things have to be there. And then a major one is leadership and governance, which I think maybe I'll put my comments towards to say that's where maybe we are kind of needing a lot of work in leadership and governance. It's not just in government, but even in some of the corporates that I've interacted with locally, that you see that there are some deficiencies in leadership in terms of how they are seeing these things. If we are really going to not be a spectator, like I think we missed out on the third industrial revolution. If we're not going to miss out on this one, then it's important then that we really put in measures so that we own what's happening. It's about equity. Equity not just in terms of distribution, to ensure that everyone has access to this, and we have systems that say if I speak in Zim Dancehall is a language. If I speak in Zim Dancehall, the art app knows what I'm saying. If I say Guka, it knows what I'm talking about. So it's not just about equity in distribution, but also equity in terms of shares. We all use WhatsApp and Facebook, but I can't buy Facebook shares, or it's actually Meta shares. I can't buy Apple stock and so forth. So we need to then have our own solutions, and that will address then what you just mentioned, where we then avoid maybe rushing to AI where AI might not work because we don't have infrastructure. So it's always important that we don't start with the technology. That's what I always advise even the young ones, that people try to sometimes squeeze AI or a chatbot to do what's not required. where SMS and USSD could actually do the work. So let's not just start with the technology and try to twist it to solve a problem. Let's look at our readers on the ground, and then having innovation as a culture, we then come up with low-cost initiatives that then work in our environment. Thanks.
Vili, you mentioned during your talk that I think we are, getting into this big data world. We're collecting lots of data, and AI uses data. And we're going to live in a world where you will have a machine that will be able to analyze millions and millions of records and will know everything about you from the time that you were in your mother's womb until the time that you're going to visit the doctor, and it can use all of that to analyze a fingerprint, and it can predict your likelihood of getting this cancer and so forth. I know you work in a largely administrative role in healthcare. Where do you, how do we ensure that we don't lose that trade-off between privacy? Because, she mentioned very real concern, a funny story is I was chatting the other day with my friends, and I wanted to buy an iPhone. I didn't put it on my phone, I discussed it in a conversation. And the next time I was on my Facebook, the adverts that were popping up were to purchase an iPhone. So I felt like someone is spying on me, So how do we, mention that, how do we ensure that trade-off between security, privacy to data? And I know in Africa, I think it's a real issue that there is historical data of people feeling that they're afraid that they will be experimented on. Where is this thing going? Where is this thing being implanted in me? What does it mean? How do we manage that balance between privacy, security, and the need to advance?
Thanks, Doc. So before I talk about that, there's an earlier question that you asked about where are we going to use this now in terms of improving access to healthcare. The main problems that we've got from what we've seen is at primary healthcare level. People just need access to primary healthcare. If you can make it happen there, we would have solved a lot of our problems. And there is technology that's becoming available even to assist that, like the examples I gave on mental health and well-being counseling. But now you also find in diagnostics, you've got the point-of-care diagnostics machines that are becoming available. Or even when I was growing up, getting an HIV test was a mission. You needed to go to a whole hospital thing. Now you can buy a kit in a pharmacy, So I think for me that's a good progression that will help us in terms of access at primary healthcare level, where we are actually failing. On your question, one of the things that is critical in health is cyber security. And that's the only answer. That will always be there as a risk. And right now you find that globally companies are spending over 10% of their information technology budgets on cyber security, because people do tend to abuse that. People are sensitive about that information. The earlier example I gave about the vaccination app that we had done, that it wasn't given a chance. It was all about, you're going to store this thing on the cloud, but you said cloud is the safest thing ever. No, people are worried about cybersecurity, and these things do happen where people do hack on these machines. But the best we can do is to actually put that safeguard. Marlon talked about the democratization of healthcare. By giving people control of their own data, I think in my view, it's a good start in that as an individual, I should feel I've got access to my data. I share it with whoever I want to share it with, But I think you raised a valid question. When we talk about health tech, medtech, cybersecurity is huge, and people do want to make money out of it. I came across an example early last year where one of the Australian health funds was hacked, and they wanted money out of it, In the end, they didn't get the money, but that whole thing to die down, it took months on end, and they lost thousands and thousands of patients because people are not happy with their data out there. They did release the data, by the way, but,
Well, I'll make a comment about privacy and security. I think in the US there's a law enacted called HIPAA. And when you first start working at a healthcare facility, in whatever capacity, you could be the person cleaning the rooms, the janitor, all the way to the top level, you know, to the CEO of the health organization. You are not allowed to access people's files. There's computers littered all over. You cannot put in your password and say, oh, my mom's here, let me check on her data. They've made that such a, I guess, robust law that people are really afraid that they'll be prosecuted and they'll go to jail for accessing people's healthcare. And I think that's the level of privacy that ultimately it needs to be legislated in so that people don't feel free. And I know one of the downsides to Zim is that we do still have paper charts floating around, and anyone can, happenstance look into that. And so that's the unfortunate thing. But I think with electronic medical records, you can provide patients their own access through patient portals where they have secure access to what they need to know. And then on the health provider side, you can make it so that if that patient is not your current patient, you don't have to also get into their chart.
Okay, I think for the sake of time, I'm going to open it to the floor if there's anyone else who may want to ask a question.
So I've got a couple of questions for everybody on the floor. I know Marlon is probably the only tech advisor in medicine. I'll call him that. So a med tech consultant. The one thing that has struck me is the cost of all medical technology. So the cost of anything and everything in medicine is really high. So adoption sometimes is difficult because of the cost of these things. If I was to give a personal example, anything that works in intensive care, any mobile device, if it's being fronted by GE or Mindray, you're looking at a minimum of 25 or 30,000 to actually have me sitting in one room having to, just looking at the patient's monitor. So patient on a ventilator, patient on a multi-parameter monitor, just being in the next room, I have to pay $25,000 or $30,000 for that. So the cost is a big negative for that. Giving examples like Vuli mentioned point of care machines, like a point of care ultrasound machine, something that I can use with my mobile device. I'm looking at a minimum of $5,000 for the probe that I can just attach to my phone. Looking at examples in fintech, how M-Pesa and how EcoCash came onto the scene, and they provided a much cheaper way of transacting. No need for a bank account, no need for any expensive technology other than the cell phone that you have, whether it's an iPhone or a Mbuzi, it works just the same. How are we in the healthcare space trying to adopt that sort of model? How are we going to EcoCash or M-Pesa our way to adopt healthcare technology? That's the first one, and I hope Marlon and Vuli could answer that for me. The second one is for Marlon, and I'll give a reference. I don't know if anyone has watched the movie The Last Samurai, where there was a fight for the soul of Japan. You had an old samurai who was fighting, the Industrial Revolution, because they felt that this Industrial Revolution was sort of bad, for Japan as a whole. So it's a fight between technology. So it's the new age guys versus, the old school guys. The old school guys still sit on, the councils, and they're very, very influential. So how do you, Marlon, propose that we get these technologies out there? Because primary care is a big problem. But if a patient in Chiandambuya or in Bulilimangwe can access the services of Dr. Munutu at, minimal cost, how do we get the regulation in place so that we do the ultimate good? And I know there is always a cost that is attached to this. There's a cost for the consultation. There's a cost for your expertise. But how then do we adopt these technologies so that we can, benefit the doctor, who also needs a good salary, according to you. So doctor needs a good salary and the patient needs a service. And for Sarana, I'll make another reference because I like Star Wars. And I'm always very offended when I see medical treatment being given to, even in the most critical time, a trauma victim, a medical droid comes to give treatment. And I'm thinking to myself, is this where we're going? I don't know what you think about that, in terms of AI, digitization of the healthcare space, in radiology, in pathology, where an AI-generated system can say, this is this type of cancer, so give this treatment. So that sort of renders pathology and radiology, useless. So I don't know what you think about that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Doc. Many issues that you raised there, issues to do with technology being expensive, then issues to do with there being an old guard and how to engage them, as well as the need to also hopefully get solutions that are at scale as much as M-Pesa and EcoCash. In terms of cost, I'll try to make it short. In terms of cost, I think in my time in e-health and digital health, one thing that I've learned is that it's not just about the technology, but it's a way of thinking. So sometimes not about resources, but it's about being resourceful. So yes, I do understand ICU machines do cost a lot coming from all those companies, and I would like to, if I'm on a ventilator, I would like it to be under a ventilator from a brand that I know works. It won't, it won't die out on me. So I mean, those guys have kind of cornered the market, and so it's expensive. But for us to break that, we do need local solutions, and sometimes before we just rush to buy some things, with that mentality of being resourceful, we can hack some things. And you mentioned about the connection between the doctor and the patient. So we have, yes, maybe the patient is in ICU and you are at home. So maybe the link might be manual. Say there's a nurse in ICU who is entering it into a system so that then gets to you without then buying a system that is all inbuilt already with IoT features in there and clinical decision support systems, AI all in there. So being resourceful, there are ways to then hack things. Then in terms of the old guard, they are there. You mentioned 100 years of existence, and yeah, we want people to live up to 100, but they should not be running the country at 100. So anyway, age doesn't matter as long as they are young at heart. So in my experience, what I've realized with those guys is they need it to be very visual. So if you come and talk, they won't. So if you do a prototype and you show it to them to say, this is going in here, it's going to do that, and that's the result, then they'll then warm up to it. And they also like to attend these international conferences where they hear other young people talking about how they're using technology in their countries. So when they come here, they'll make the right speeches. So when we then just show up to them with prototypes that work, it lubricates the conversation. It then doesn't become too much of a headache for them to try and see if it is wizardry and witchcraft at Hogwarts that we are applying to get this technology working. Then in terms of solutions being getting up to scale, I think Mr. Matthew mentioned something that's important, that we need our economics to work. If we look at people that are covered under health insurance, it might be less than 5%. And I mean true cover, USD cover, which with shortfalls, not long falls. So there are fundamentals that we then just have to, we do need our economy to get up there, but also through innovation, we can tap into that uninsured market, that informal market, and come up with solutions that are low cost to then rope them in. Thanks.
Can I just comment on the issue that you raised where younger generations maybe are not coming up as fast? In my profession, which is chartered accountants, I've seen that work quite interestingly, where the younger people actually take up the mantle, you know, and go into those leadership positions, into those committees, you know. I became president of that institute when I was like 40 years old, you know. So that's the kind of thing that people should do. And I was one of the older ones. There had been some that became president of that institute when they're in their early 30s. So that's the way to do it. But can I talk about the costs, which is what you raised? The problem with Zim is that our healthcare, in my view, is underfunded, you know? Underfunded from a point of the public sector, what we should be putting as government into money. If I were government, personally, I would be putting a lot of money into health and education, just those two things. And I think it will change quite a lot of our perspective. It's underfunded, we're undercovered as well, as Marlon has mentioned, but there's also low trust, you know, including out-of-pocket expenses. I don't know how you measure wealth, but I can assure you the wealthiest person in Zimbabwe is not the top surgeon or even the chartered accountant, but it's probably a prophet or a priest. Ask yourself that. It's the trust. We have to build the trust levels, you know. Once people have got trust, they'll put their money into it. We need more money, people funding, also out of their pockets.
Sorry, I know we are pressed for time, but I think two things which also will contribute to costs. MedTech, most of the systems are closed loop systems. When you see these corporates building machines, they will build them so that they don't talk to each other. And that's the difference with fintech, I think. We need a position where we get rid of closed loop systems for equipment. And there's the law of patenting. When someone then innovates, these big guys have patented certain processes and certain equipment so that it also acts as a barrier for someone in Zim to actually then produce a certain product, and that also contributes to cost.
I'll try and keep mine brief and short, seeing as we're pressed for time. But I truly believe technology, the internet, is where everyone lives. It's a space that everyone is going into. And I think from the medical point of view, there's two aspects to it. There's the science of medicine, which is very easy to automate, and you can have AI involved in helping you make the decisions and everything. But there's also the art or the humanity of medicine, okay? And in terms of that, I don't think that's something that a machine will ever replace. So I feel that what's going to happen is medical schools, the way we teach, we're going to teach more of the humanity, the art of medicine, and that is what you'll need your doctors for, your nurses for, as opposed to the parts that can be easily automated, and that machines could actually do better than we can with very few errors, which with a lot of benefit to the patients. So I think when you look at it that way, it becomes a lot clearer and a lot simpler. But I also think there's a lot of ethical challenges that come in. For example, with big data, when the medical aides know that from the time you're conceived to the time you're presenting, this is your risk of this cancer, this is your risk of a heart attack, of a stroke, they can then choose to not insure you for those things. So there's also a lot of ethics behind those, knowing that this person is more likely to get this than the next person. And it's also where regulators and everything need to come on board to say, okay, as a healthcare insurer, you can't then say, well, because we know this about you, we're not going to take you on for that.
Okay, great. I think we're completely pressed for time. I think hopefully we've proven that healthcare workers are not the most boring people. I think we can have a chance to chat outside when we're done over the lunch break. I would like to thank my panelists for a very interesting chat, and I think hopefully all of us have had our appetites, we're keen to know more about MedTech. Personally, I think I am. So thank you very much.
My name is Dumisani Nkala, and I'll be your moderator for this panel. We are going to have a keynote address by Ivana Hu, and she'll introduce herself shortly. And then we'll get into a panel shortly after that. Over to you, Ivana.
All right. Thank you so much for taking that very short break. My name is Ivana. I am the CEO of Omelas, and we're an AI company. Prior to this current administration, I did a lot of work on 5G. around the world in terms of educating people about what 5G is, to 5G policy, not only in the US, but also with some of the allied countries. And so, we've heard a lot so far today about the applications, right, of emerging technologies like VR and AR in fintech and medtech. And then you also have the smart cities, educational technology. But all of these things are only possible if we work on two issues, right? One is the constant power, the supply of power. And then the second is having access to high-speed internet and mobile data. And this specifically means 5G, because a lot of the things that we're talking about on the back end involve millions and millions of data points. And you need high-speed computing in order to actually create the algorithm at the end, and being able to disseminate that across long distance. So while Zim might not actually be currently ready for 5G for the mass consumer market, it's critical for at least industries to have access in order to actually be able to move into the fourth industrial revolution. And so, I'm here as a guest speaker that the U.S. Embassy has brought over. I know a lot of you from one-on-one meetings that I've had this week, as well as the seminar that I did virtually, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, maybe 1 week ago. Everything's blurring together. And I'm not going to, be here and tell you, this is what I think Zimbabwe should do, because I'm not from here. I'm only the technical expertise. But in my opinion, the ecosystem that we want to create and foster around 5G should involve 6 parts. The first is the technical. So should we look at fiber optics, satellites, especially with the incoming Starlink and other satellite companies? And should we be looking at traditional 5G or the virtual version where it's a lot more focused on cloud? The second is really the finance piece. Hardware and the software behind 5G are extremely expensive. And there are different types of models around the world depending on the vendors that you're currently working with, right? So how can we actually involve external and internal banks and creditors, loans, et cetera, to actually be able to work with telcos here and other telco players as well to make sure that that can actually be financed without falling into the debt issue, the debt trap. The third is regulations. 5G is very heavily focused on, it's very dependent on the government giving out and doing spectrum auctions and giving out licenses, right? And also, because of the applications of 5G, it also involves a lot of regulations around data privacy, cybersecurity, and who actually owns their digital data. The fourth are the vendors. Currently, we were told that there are only 30,000 devices in the entire country that can access 5G. Right? And out of the 30,000, only 2,500 are mobile devices. So if you have an iPhone that's not an iPhone 12 and above, you can't get 5G because your phone just doesn't work, right? Samsung has not been certified, and so even if you have the latest version of Samsung phones, you still can't get 5G in Zimbabwe. So a lot of these issues still need to be worked out before we can have this network effect of 5G. The fifth is basically we need to actually involve universities and research. The reason why a lot of countries have entered into 5G is because of the economic impact. Countries can specifically say, based on research so far, we know that 5G is going to increase our GDP in the next 5 years by $2 trillion, or $21 billion, or however much it is. We tried to find that number for Zimbabwe, and it currently does not exist. And so we're using other proxies saying, well, you know, this is the number for Southern Africa, and so maybe this is a number for Zimbabwe. But this is where universities can actually come in and be able to give us that data point, right, in order to create that demand. Universities also need to start turning out telco engineers and developers who understand 5G. It's a very technical field. I was just at HIT, the Harare Institute of Technology, yesterday, and they just started or restarted their telco specialization. But it's still going to take them a couple years to have engineers here in Zimbabwe who understand how 5G works. And finally, we need to talk to the international players. The majority of the country, the majority of the world is already deploying 5G to a certain extent, right? And there are some countries that are now looking at 6G. So if Zimbabwe is not at the table when these standards and norms around 5G are set up, because this also starts to get into adjacent fields of data privacy. You know, the EU is about to pass their AI Act, which also is a series of regulations around what industries can or cannot do in terms of making their algorithms transparent. Zimbabwe needs to be in that conversation. And so working with the African Development Bank or the African Union, or being more involved at, you know, the UN level with the International Telecom Union would definitely be something that would be really helpful and needed. So, and finally, we have to think about the societal impact of 5G, because while it is critical for businesses, it does actually emphasize a problem of inequality, which I believe someone brought up during the first panel, of if the majority of the country is still at 2G, that still means that we need to maintain the 3G, the 2G, the 4G, the 3G LTE networks, right? So that people can still get access to connectivity. So how can we actually think about the role that the government can play in this, or the role that donor agencies can play in this, or, you know, what the telcos can do, et cetera. And finally, and this is something that I have gotten in every single presentation I've given when I ask for Q&A. One out of the top 3 questions I get is, can you please tell me if 5G causes cancer or COVID, right? And that's a very fair and legitimate question, because there are people everywhere around the world who believe that. And that's the reason why 5G base towers have gone destroyed or vandalized in multiple countries around the world. And so this does involve public education campaigns to address myths or disinformation campaigns like these, saying, no, 5G does not cause any of these things, and sort of explain to them why, right? So I think I'm going to end my keynote here and turn it over to the panel. I know that I touched on a bunch of different things, and if you have any questions, just let me know.
Thank you so much, Ivana. And welcome to the panel time. Thank you so much for keeping your remarks brief and those very incisive points that you gave, which I hope we can revisit as we are on the panel. Like I said, my name is Dumisani Ngala. The way that we will launch the panel is, first of all, I'm going to please ask you to not fire. Oh, it's a good thing at the door they will have removed all your weapons, because I know that ICT players are one of the most hated players in the room, because everybody perceives that we are way too expensive. And so it's a good thing that there'll be no gunshots fired today. But we will start off the panel by just asking each and every panelist to introduce themselves very briefly and what their role is, and then we'll launch into the actual questions for the panel.
Okay, thank you. Edwin Banda, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Econet Wireless. And no, those nurses are not Econet engineers. Yeah. But I think seriously though, I think all sectors, well, industries rather, you know, are suffering from brain drain like anybody else. But you know, for us, our corporate vision is actually we envision a future that leaves no African behind, that is digitally. So really, I am sure that as we will be discussing, those some of those points will come to light. Thank you.
Thanks to me. I'm Neva Ncube. I'm the CEO of Ndebele, and I'm also the current chair of the Internet Access Provider Association.
Good afternoon. My name is Tawanda Bwanya. I'm the technical director for Telecontract, and I'm a strong proponent of the fact that Africa's biggest resource is its youthful population, and that's what we need to invest in.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Uvera from DFA Zimbabwe. I'm the current CEO at DFA Zimbabwe, and we are the new player in the market. I think we just licensed recently, and we're trying to push a new narrative into the industry of open access.
Thank you. Afternoon, colleagues. My name is Hasham Yambo. I will hasten to not say that I'm an engineer because it got me into trouble. Someone put that as my first name, so when I got here, I couldn't be registered. I work for the regulator, so all the guys that you are seeing here, they always come to my office for their licenses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for introducing yourselves. I just want to make a preliminary comment just to say that it's so interesting to be in a symposium or a seminar which is not industry specific. Represented within the room, we've got medtech, we've got fintech, we've got agritech, we've got edutech, and we've got ICTs. And I think there's something very special here that we need to capture and make sure that we have similar discussions going forward, because sometimes we get so siloed that we don't see the bigger picture. And I think it's been very interesting to listen to colleagues in medicine and to listen to colleagues in finance and understand their challenges, so that when we're solutioning in ICT, we're solutioning for the right things. So just wanted to make that comment as we start. There's a couple of key themes that seem to be coming across, and they seem to cut across, and so far I've captured 10 of them, and I'm hoping that as we ask the panelists to speak to some of these themes, they will be able to address them. And one of the biggest themes that seems to be coming through is the need, all of these applications run on an infrastructure. So perhaps I'd like to start with Neva and Hugh answering this question. What is the state of our readiness to support the fourth industrial revolution? Because I think all of these things that we've been talking about need infrastructure, they need scale. Ivana's just cast a vision for a 5G future, which by the sounds of it, we're not yet anywhere close to. What is the state of the readiness of our networks for this? Sorry, I'll ask Edwin as well to respond to this, but maybe Neva, you can start, and then Edwin.
Okay, thanks to me for that question, and I'll answer it in two parts. Because when we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, there are key imperatives that need to be there, and one of them is high-speed connectivity. The other one is low latency, edge computing, and network security. So those are the key things that really anchor our ability to deliver fourth industrial revolution solutions. So coming back home, and I think all colleagues in this room would really understand that the networks have suffered from undercapitalization for a very long time due to various reasons. Obviously, as a country and as an economy, there are a lot of challenges that we've had to grapple with in the last 20 odd years. So because of that, we've laid the foundations of being ready for the fourth industrial revolutions. So if you look at the current players that are in the market, there's a lot of investment that they've done in fiber infrastructure. There are some that have also invested in data centers. But on the whole, I think there is need for all of us collectively to put more infrastructure to support the technologies that are coming, all these frontier technologies. So we are not 100% ready. The foundations have been laid, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. Thank you.
Okay, I think just adding on to my CEO here, Neva, how ready can we ever be? I think, as he said, the first impediment is capital. And we've come into a market with investors that are quite interesting in getting that infrastructure done. Hence, I said I started introducing myself with an open access, which I'll try to explain later. But are we ready? Yes, and Neva said yes, yes and no. We have the plans, we have the architecture with us, but it's just now rolling it out. Is the other question that we might want to ask, is the market ready when we do roll out as well? Because I think there's also a lot of statutory things that we also have to go over. I think we've got the regulator here. Guys, we're talking about convincing the powers that be that what she talked about frequencies. One of the major impediments in 5G in this country is frequency spectrum allocation and its cost. You would want to come in with the investor and tell them that we want to roll out a 5G network. The investment that is required will scare him away because the fees that you have to pay. Or rather, if we use those fees into building infrastructure rather than to paying the regulator. So those are some of the things. If you speak to Neva, you speak to Econet, Liquid, we're ready. We're ready. It's just that the capital that we require.
Thank you, and I concur with my previous colleagues. So really, for me, when I look at it, I would break it into two. There's the B2B and the B2C. So B2C meaning the normal customer on the street. So you'll find that the investments that we have been doing have been largely to the consumer, the end customer. So we have put in 2G, 3G, 4G, and lately we are trialing out 5G. But these the use cases for these are mostly for the end consumer. Then when you look at the business to business, which would then also support the 4IR, you'd find that that's where maybe the readiness may not be there, in the sense that when you look at it, our coverage, we are looking at population coverage. We are, as for Econet, is around 94%. But when you look at rural coverage, it's about 78%. So that gap is actually possibly where you've got that mine, where you've got those sugar estates or the like, that would actually need the connectivity to support the various automations that they would need to take. So in terms of readiness, it then speaks to what my colleagues are mentioning, the issue of adoption, I would say. Because what we have seen, and also maybe to reflect on what a previous speaker who said we missed out on the third industrial revolution, which was essentially automation. But now you will see that we are more into the autonomous automation, where the tractor will go into the field on its own and do all the work and park itself. So for that, you need connectivity. And I believe that the industry players are really ready. But obviously, as businesses, the uptake has to be there. And again, it will then speak to the accelerators. You know, my heart sank a little bit when Dr. Ralph, who was advocating for medical, the digital aspect of it, then went back to normal practice. Because now you see that that element of adoption and the people who are accelerating digital acceleration are actually quite far in between here in Zimbabwe, which is a big problem for us. So if you go on the internet right now and you want to search something, you'll not get it. What you'll get is maybe South African companies. But the more we get adoption, I believe that the industry would be able to support those requirements. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edwin. And perhaps you lead me into a question which is probably the big elephant in the room, where you've talked about the problem is that there's little adoption while the technology might be there, but perhaps the uptake and the adoption is low. And perhaps the pushback that may come from the room is, well, the connectivity solution is far too expensive for mass adoption. So perhaps I can start with my esteemed regulatory friend at the end, Engineer Mlambo. Maybe give us an industry perspective. Why is our connectivity so very expensive? And then I'll ask my colleague Tawanda to also speak to the costing of our solutions and why the uptake, maybe, which is the other side of the equation of why the uptake may not be so good.
Thank you very much for that question. Maybe for starters, let me say that when we say that connectivity is expensive, I think expensive is a relative term, to be honest. Yes, yeah, it is. Because it all depends on who is who. So if we want to, if you look at the cost, the tariffs that are being charged, I think essentially they are charged in RTGS, essentially. So if we want to look at the actual value of our tariffs, they're actually very low comparatively if you compare regionally. Yeah, I'm serious. If you do that, you get to know that. So what I'm saying again, in the telecom sector, I think everything that is used to be able to give us the service that we get is actually sourced, outside our borders, and that needs Forex. And for these guys to be able to recoup whatever they would have invested with our tariffs, it will be quite a non-starter, to say the least. So sometimes we really need to look at things the way they are and then see how best we can then maneuver around them. Otherwise, yes, expensive, I understand what we mean when we say it is expensive, because the ordinary person out there cannot afford the tariffs, which is true. But in real terms, are they getting enough? Because at the end of the day, the equipment needs to be renewed, they need to buy space, they need to do a lot of other things. And this is done using hard currency. So will they be able to go and buy fresh equipment to roll out their network out there or not? Otherwise, we're going to have a dying service. This is what we don't want. So let's look at it in that light. I understand that it is expensive, and I also believe that. But let's try to look at it in real terms to say, is it really expensive? Let's see what other countries are charging, and then compare to what we are paying, and then we can see the difference. Thank you.
I can't oppose my regulator. So I'll speak to maybe the cost build-up from a service provider endpoint. And there is a disconnect, I would agree with him, on as far as investment versus what you get out of it. I think this is true for most businesses in this country. But for maybe to just buttress what my colleague said around readiness. So what we have in Zimbabwe is a case where investment has been made. So for instance, backbone-wise, most of us have enough backbone probably to carry 5G in terms of the physical infrastructure, the fiber required. The next level would be the investment in actual capacity, equipment that you need to put into to capacitate to enable that. And that is a function of where is the customer going to come? What justifies that kind of investment? So most of us over the years have been really investing a lot into that infrastructure if you're a fiber operator like us. And what we're basically stuck on is how do you activate the demand? Because we can't capacitate this network in terms of equipment without the corresponding demand who's going to pay for it. So what becomes the major constraint there is the readiness of the market. 5G is not necessarily going to be cheaper because I think Ivan already spoke to the huge investment required. So there will be some cost. It might give you more speed. It would definitely give you more speed, but the cost still has to be recouped. We are here to do business. So that's our reality. And one of the pain points for me personally would be, obviously, there has to be a meeting point. We are a landlord country for one, which means most of our capacity to get to the internet for one, Mr. Ndlovu was talking about cloud, has to come through other countries. We don't have a port. So there are elements I do think that, at a regulatory level, we need to find ways of further democratizing access to that, because what it does is it will, in the interim, actually enable us to unlock more to the user. Because the cost of that gets cheaper. It means what we can offer to the user. Because I think maybe the disconnect could be that cost versus what you get. We do want more speed. You want to stream faster. You want to watch that video quicker. So maybe that's where we would need to meet.
Thank you so much, Tawanda and Engineer Myambo. Perhaps let me direct this question just following on that line of thinking, and maybe lines of thinking that came from previous colleagues who talked about the scale issues of a country like Zimbabwe, where I think similar to, I think it was in the financial services chat, they spoke about, the keynote speaker spoke about the fact that when you look at a Zimbabwe, which has only got a population of 12 million, versus a South Africa, which is maybe 52 million, the scale when you're rolling out a network of this type and the vis-a-vis the investment and the capital investment that's required, perhaps that also creates some level of disconnect, and maybe my financial colleagues in the room at some point can chip in on this one. Maybe can I direct this question to you, Neva, and then perhaps to Ivana as well, just from a global perspective, to maybe make comments around how does or how can a Zimbabwean, we've got, I think, a landscape that has about 11 to 13 players in it, coexist, address such a small scale market, but yet the demands on the capital investment are very real, and the customers are crying and saying it's just way too expensive for us to really roll out anything viable on it. What are some of the possible solutioning that we can come up with? Maybe, Ivana, you can start at a global scale, and then Neva, you can follow, maybe just narrowing it to our Zim context.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, I mean, to a certain extent, right, the size of the country and the number of people in the country don't really matter, because if we go with that line of thinking, then countries like Estonia, Latvia, there are plenty of small countries out there, Rwanda, right, they wouldn't get 5G. They would be still stuck in 2G or 3G. And that's clearly not true. Estonia has 1 million people, maybe less, something like that. Right, very small country, but they're rolling it out. But I think it's because the governments there they value the access to the internet. And these are the same countries that have been lobbying the UN to actually add on the right to access the internet as a fundamental human right. Now, that's very different from getting access to high-speed internet like 5G. But you can see what they're saying is that, yes, if I'm Rwanda, I have plenty of other issues, I have a limited budget, but I really value the fact that I have a couple of really great top-notch universities and R&D centers, and they need to have 5G. But the way that they think about it is a little bit different, because they're segmenting it not as, let's just talk about the whole of country that requires 5G. They recognize that the industries and universities need 5G. The mass consumer market might not need it. And so what they're going to do is they're going to foster innovations that require a bunch of, computing and all that stuff on the back end that the companies have to work on. But when the consumers are actually engaging, they're doing it through lower tech, right? They're doing it through apps that are very, very basic, that do not require a lot of bandwidth, so that they can still access their mobile money, they can still access their educational technology apps, right?
And so it's a different way of thinking about the model and how they're going to perhaps in the beginning subsidize some of the 5G because they see it not as an individual right, but they see it as a public good. But they know that they're going to reap that benefit down the line. And that's the line of argument that they're using with their investors and creditors.
Thanks, Ivana, for that, for giving us the global perspective. I think bringing it closer home, firstly, I will talk about us as players because I think we've got a role to play. We're talking about, you said about 13 or so players that are in this market. And one of the things that we need to do internally is just to make sure that we can work together better, to make sure that we don't duplicate the infrastructure that we are rolling out, because that is obviously wastage of funding. So amongst ourselves also, we just need to introspect and make sure that when we are rolling out infrastructure, we're not duplicating ourselves. We're not using infrastructure as a competitive advantage, but making sure that the infrastructure is rolled out for the public good. So that's one of the things. But because we are a country that has been in distress, financial distress for a number of years, 2 decades to be specific, for us to leapfrog and get into the 4th industrial revolution and be able to access the 5G that Ivana was talking about, we actually need to partner also with global players. I had the occasion sometime last year of going into Namibia and seeing them commission a hyperscale data center that they've done in partnership with Google. So we need to begin to speak to these hyperscalers, for instance, and convince them that in a country of 16 million, I think, in a country of 16 million, there is enough market and activity for them to want to come and invest in Zimbabwe. Then the government has got a role to play. I think one of the ways where the government can play and play actively is making sure that they roll out infrastructure in the underserved markets. Our current internet penetration is around about 65% now, I think is at the end of December. So we still have about 35% of the population that is not having access to internet. And the reasons are being simple. For us, we've got a profit motive. It's not economic at times to roll out infrastructure in those areas. And therein lies an opportunity for government to be able to go out and roll out passive infrastructure that can be shared by all players. And therefore, that by so doing, they'll close that gap. It can either be government direct funding or government through the Universal Services Fund. That can also play a part. And also linked to that is the taxes. Just to speak to the cost that everyone worries about. I think we are the only sector that has got 2 additional taxes that no one else has. In 2014, a new tax was introduced to the sector called the excise duty on airtime, which is 5%. And then another tax was introduced in 2016, which is the health levy. These were supposed to be temporal taxes, but they've stuck with us for this long, and they contribute to the cost build-up that my 2 colleagues were talking about. So those are some of the things that the government can help with, and obviously not to mention the spectrum fees, because we've got a blueprint on us getting to a digital economy. So do we want to reap that out of the spectrum fees, or do we want to make sure that we provide an enabling environment for people to roll out 5G, and together we get to the digital economy? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Neva. Engineer Miyamba, I'm going to throw you once again into the spotlight and maybe start with yourself and then with Hugh to follow on quite quickly after that. And the question really is, I think, and it's been mentioned in every single conversation we've had so far, there seems to be a disconnect between our policymakers and the industries that are running on the ground. How do you think we can bridge this divide between policymakers and industry
in order to ensure that we're all moving in the same direction in relation to these things, because I think Neva here is bringing up the issue of a somewhat disconnect between policymakers and government and the industries that they govern in regard to rolling out more network and making it very efficient and effective to do so. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for that question. I think what needs to happen is that if you look at the pace at which technology moves, it doesn't really make sense to have a 5-year policy or some regulation that is, goes on and on and on and on, yet technology is moving. So there's need really to make sure that if we have got a policy, it has to be poised maybe at most maybe 2 years, and then it's subject for review. Otherwise, if you've got 5-year policy and then it goes on, and yet things are happening on the ground, then it doesn't really work. So there's need maybe to sensitize the government, maybe on the part of the regulator, to try to ensure that we have shorter policy periods as opposed to the current cases where maybe we've got more than 5 years or more. It doesn't really go well when it comes to technology.
Thank you, Engineer. Maybe if you speak to it from, you're the newest player in the room. How easy have you found it to navigate our policy environment, and what do you think can be done to just make it a little bit more effective?
I think to the credit of our regulator, Potras, I think the policies are sound and they've got a good intention. It's I think where we sometimes in the industry where we go a bit talk on top of them is the licensing fees, because I'll give you a typical example. To just get a 20 meg chunk of frequency will cost you $7.2 million US. I mean, if that's $7.2 million US, if we as the industry had that and plow it back into the infrastructure, I think we'd be able to deploy some of these technologies much faster. I know you're given for a certain period, but we can continue this discussion with. I think our regulator has been quite perspective, because they're listening to us. We've had a lot of platforms that we've spoken to them, that we need to just look at some of this pricing. Yes, for Zimbabwe, 7.2 million is a lot, but if you look at other regions, you find that it's even more expensive. But let's go back to what Neva has said, that we've been underfunded for a while. So let's consider that pool, that if I have 7.2 million, should I be paying for a license for it, or should I be deploying network? So it's as a new player, those are some of the things that you look at. And I know that issue that you talked about, the pricing and our services being expensive, so people now can start taking that perspective, why some of it is that expensive. And the taxing that Neva has talked about, I think we're the heaviest taxed industry in the country. I know when you look at the Potras report, there's a record 70 billion RTGS that was done in the last quarter. But they're also not looking at the cost side of that as well. Because that 70 billion is now, it's overtaken by the rate. We all know what rates we're talking about. Because that 70 billion ZW, really, if you put it now into real money, it is actually nothing but then the cost that we require to deploy a network. So yeah, it's continuous lobbying with Potras to make sure that we get to a level where then data becomes affordable for everyone. And one of the things that I want to share this when I was in a conference with Potras, one of the things that our Potras head kept on saying is that the other thing is our socio-economic situation in the country is not right as well. So the pricing might look high, but there's also that fundamental, the socio-economics, they are not right. The salaries are low. Let's look at and when the salaries are low, you cannot afford some of these services. That's the truth. I think you began about being equal and fairness. It's not the same thing.
First of all, I want to just thank everyone for making time today. We went 30 minutes longer than I promised you. I know there's like heart surgeons that had to slip out because they need to go save lives. But we're grateful for the time that you have given us today for this conversation, and we hope that these conversations continue to be incredibly valuable for you. This range of conversations reminded me of a moment in the United States government. I'll share a little bit of an inside story. We had done about 15 years of PEPFAR, which of course Zimbabwe knows well, and there was concerns about us not reaching young women, young girls in particular for care. And so there was a huge study done about why were our interventions not meeting their targets, where were we going wrong? And they did this huge global study across where we were doing HIV/AIDS programs everywhere, and then girls programs in other countries, schooling, different issues. And they did a global call-in, so all of us professionals around the world call in to listen to the results. And what they argued is girls have different gatekeepers than boys. They got to get their parents to say yes, they've got responsibilities with younger siblings. Their after school time is taken up differently than boys are. And then to get a girl to come, you need buy-in from their parents, their go-go's, the people in their lives that need to say yes. And so if you want to do programming for girls, it's got to be personalized. You have to have people who are part of that program out there actively building relationships with their caretakers. And you have to find ways to make them realize you mean them, because they're told in so many ways it's not about them. It's about their brother, it's about somebody else. And so for girls to show up, it's going to require 80% more contact time to get to the outcome. Now, these are development professionals from all over the world, Americans who are dedicated to this, and the answer throughout the whole conversation was, that's expensive. And the researchers, God bless them, kept saying, if that's the cost of reaching your target audience, then it's not expensive, that's the cost. And people for an hour sat on this call going, ugh, but can't they just show up like boys? Don't we wish? I think there is a what it costs to do this that has to be in every piece of it. And we can want companies to give it away for free, but at some point those companies fail. And I think we all see how that works out in the health sector and other sectors. You can't. You have to cover your bottom line. But one word that has been said today in this conversation that I think is super important is public good. There are a few sectors in our societies that can't just be about the bottom line. And they don't thrive if it's about making a ton of money for them. One of those is electricity. And there's a reason why those are co-ops in the United States, and they're run by communities. And we keep electricity going because it's not a huge business where you make huge margins. It's a public good. And I think internet needs to be thought of in that space. And I love the question about that socioeconomic divide. There are constraints here that are unique to this country. But out of the 7 nations I have had the privilege of serving in, this is probably one of the wealthiest. The chrome, the gold, the diamonds, there are resources here that could make these goods available, like you see in Denmark, like you see in other countries. It's a choice of a nation about how those natural resources are turned around to level a playing field for a nation. And there's other things, and I'm happy to debate the things I'm sure people want to ask me right now. Love that debate. It's part of the job. But I do think this goes into that public good space, and there needs to be a partnership. The companies can't do it alone because it costs what it costs, but there has to be other parts of the sectors deciding this is worth investing in for a nation. And with that, I thank you all. Good night and good luck. And I hope to see you all at our next discussion. Thank you.